there is a formula for success, right? It's just being aware and actually having this information at your disposal. And you're not always ready to make some decisions as an immigrant. You say, hey, I've just booked my 2-year work permit. I don't want to think about permanent residency. But when you can get people into that mentality, that's what we try to do with moving to Canada. And it really helps people because it can have a huge impact on their lives.
Hi everyone, and welcome to episode number 44 of the EMIGRANT'S podcast, where we share stories of people who left their country to chase a better life. And through these stories, you can find ideas, resources, and motivation to do the same. I'm Biasi, and my guest this week, Ruairi, is originally from Ireland and moved to Canada at 26 to work for a Canadian company. Leaving his country and moving across the ocean was quite easy for him. The company he worked for took care of all the headaches. Still, he had to face some challenges. Ruairi is the founder of Moving to Canada, one of the top websites that, as you may guess, helps people moving to Canada. He started Moving to Canada as a side project after seeing many of his friends leaving the country because they couldn't figure out how to stay. He started sharing information on the immigration process and things to do to move and stay in Canada on a Facebook group, which then turned into a successful website. In this episode, Ruairi shares his stories on how he moved to Vancouver, why he quit his job to help other fellow immigrants, and what the best visa to move to Canada is. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review and share this episode with your friends. It only takes a few minutes, but it will help our show turning into something bigger and help more people reaching their dreams of moving to a new country. And now, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Ruairi. Hi Ruairi, thanks for being on the show.
Hi Daniel.
I hope I pronounced your name correctly.
No, you got it right.
Sweet, Ruairi. And you are Irish, right?
I am. So I'm an Irishman living in Vancouver. So I moved here in 2008.
2008. What age did you live? How old were you when you left Ireland?
I was 26, so I'm 38 now. So it was I was initially looking at a 2-year move, but I never left.
First of all, why did you leave Ireland?
The move to Canada kind of came all of a sudden for me. So in 2007, I was living in Dublin. It was a good setup. I was just 3 or 4 years out of university, enjoying life, but it was Dublin and the Celtic Tiger. I was a little bit bored. I was always curious about living in another country, but conscious that I needed to gain a little bit more experience because relocating as a graduate would be suicide. But what happened was a job actually came about. It was a Canadian company in Dublin. They ended up offering me a role in Vancouver where their headquarters was, and I jumped at the opportunity.
So why did they offer a position in Vancouver? I guess you were working for this company for a while. You had some experience before offering your job across the ocean.
Not quite. It was actually a friend of mine was working with the company. So a friend of mine from university was working, it was basically their EMEA, so their Europe, Middle East and Asia office. So they had set up an office in Dublin to support their European operations. She had joined the company. About 6 months later, she told me they need another derivative analyst. It was financial software. I applied, but the thing I did well was I convinced a common friend of ours to apply against me. So long story short, we both went through 3 rounds of interviews. The executives flew over from Vancouver to Dublin for the 3rd round. Greg, my friend, ended up pipping me for the job. And in the same phone call, I found out I didn't get the job I desperately wanted, but the company had been advised by my friend Dawn that I might be open to moving to Canada. So when they're analyzing the 2 candidates, one of the Canadian executives said if only one of them would move to Vancouver, and my friend Dawn said, well, Ruairi would go for sure. So both myself and Greg ended up flying to Vancouver in February 2008. We were put up in a hotel for a month of training. Greg returned to Dublin to his girlfriend, and I stayed on in Vancouver. So I guess the moral of the story was always trying to help a friend out because sometimes it can pay off.
Oh, wow. I mean, that's a big risk for the company. They take somebody straight out from school. You say that you're pretty much not experienced, right?
Yeah, I had about 3 years of experience, but I suppose I was working in derivative valuation is quite a specialized area.
Okay.
And I guess, I had a good education in Ireland. I'd studied business studies. I had a master's in financial services. But a lot of it really was, I'm very grateful to my friend Dawn. She's a genius. And the fact that she was able to refer myself and Greg had a lot of clout in terms of creating the opportunity for us.
Okay, so the job you were doing was actually a pretty specific job and was like not many people that were doing that job. That's why they hired you from Ireland and they flew you over to Vancouver.
Yes. So I was very, very lucky. So I was actually able to get sponsored by the company. So I didn't have to go through my own immigration process. And then they were able to actually process permanent residency then within a year. So I had a very easy transition to Canada. I didn't have to go through the uncertainty of job hunting or will I move or won't I move. So when you have a relocation package, it's very, very easy to make that choice. It was just, do you want to take this or not? And I would have been a fool to turn it down.
No, exactly. Sometimes when you move abroad, a simple thing like somebody pick you up at the airport can be like a game changer. You at least have a reference over there, like somebody that pick you up at the airport and a place to go. When you move to a new country, at least for me, that's a massive advantage, a massive help.
Exactly. And that's why you find a lot of people will, they'll follow a friend or they'll have a relative and things like that. So it made it very easy for me. I actually ended up getting offered a job in Vancouver, and two of my friends that I was living with in Dublin had actually moved there. So it all just fell into place very quickly, where I was very jealous of my friends relocating there. And then all of a sudden, a Canadian software company had offered me a role there. So my friends left after a year or two. They struggled to stay, which was the reality for most people when you're on a temporary work permit. But I was very lucky to be able to stay on.
So you were pretty lucky because you're already friends over in Vancouver. So even then, like leaving your country, knowing there's your mates are on the other side, it's even easier.
Exactly. So I count myself very, very lucky in how it all came about.
And why did you decide to stay in Canada, to stay in Vancouver?
It was very, very easy for me. I needed a change. I got offered a change. When I came here, it was February 2008. I knew that the Winter Olympics were on in February 2010. That to me was the milestone. I just said, look, I'm going to give it 2 years and then reassess, because I knew those things are going to be different. You're very far away from Ireland. But the key for me is I absolutely loved it. To me, it was in British Columbia, you've access to great outdoors. I always describe Vancouver. It's a very average city, but it's in an amazing location. Mm-hmm. And it was just perfect for me. Snowboarding, hiking, camping. It was just a lot of things that I either loved or wanted to do, right? I went snowboarding the first weekend I had in Vancouver, and 12 years later, I'm just still hooked on it. So it was very, very easy. The best way to describe why people stay in Vancouver is I think the list of things to do actually gets longer every year, because you start getting into different activities, right? For example, I kind of get into backcountry camping and kind of planning now to get into more backcountry snowboarding, splitboarding and things like that. So there's always a different layer. If you're kind of passionate about the outdoors and you have a good group of friends, I just find there's always something to do here in terms of challenging yourself, because there's so many activities between the water and the mountains at your disposal.
Yeah, no, that's true. It's like a beautiful location right on the ocean. The mountains are like right there. You go both sides.
Definitely.
And sounds like you have a pretty easy experience leaving Ireland and moving to Canada and get settled in Canada. But did you have to face any challenges?
Definitely. I think a lot of it is, look, it's all, the biggest challenge we have is adapting, right? And that really comes down to mindset, right? You're 26, you're still, you're relatively young and you're kind of put into a different environment. But to me, it was all upside, right? I just loved the idea of immigrating and being able to kind of reset your life and have different create new habits. Like one of the things for me was I just gone through ACL reconstruction surgery. So I was an absolute, I was a football or soccer fanatic. spent all of my time playing that. And then I basically went through a 12-month rehabilitation in that. And I kind of knew that, my soccer playing days were limited, right? So being able to kind of make a fresh start in Canada and get into snowboarding was like a new lease of life for me. It was a very frustrating experience, right? You spend, you're basically rehabilitating your knee from the whole leg completely waste. And I just loved the challenge. I think the timing was perfect for me. In terms of adapting to Canada, it's pretty easy, right? It's I'd moved from a Western world country, adapting in a new country. Canada is very welcoming for immigrants. It's very multicultural. So the pluses outweigh the minuses in so many areas for me. But I guess, one of the challenges is, being away from friends and family. That's always a huge challenge. You miss your close friends. You miss seeing your parents. You miss seeing your close family. But I think Ireland has a pretty deep history of immigration. So I'm very grateful. I guess, my friends and family are very supportive of it. They know that you're happy. They know that you can see life as a trade-off, or you can be happy for someone and realize that, they're living their best self abroad. And I think that's the real nice thing for me, that you stay in touch with people and you still feel connected, right? It's not like you're falling off the end of the earth when you immigrate nowadays. We're very lucky that we have technology, we have global travel. So it's definitely not as tough as it was to immigrate 10, 20, even 50 years ago.
No, absolutely not. Usually you mention is your parents, your friends, knowing that you're having a better life on the other side. And that's, I think, what actually happened to me. My mom was actually pretty worried when I decided to leave Italy. But when she came and visit New Zealand and saw my new life in New Zealand, she was like, I understand why you don't want to come back. I know why you want to stay here.
Yeah, and my poor parents have, two of their kids are living in Vancouver. I'm very lucky that I have a brother that actually followed me here. He immigrated in 2010. So he had just returned from Australia. So I would say that immigration was, part of my direct family as well. So in 2008, when I moved, I actually had two brothers living in Australia. So I always knew that my parents were quite comfortable with us being abroad and weren't necessarily thinking that, we're choosing to be away from family, but they were always very, very supportive. And I always I'm very grateful, I guess, to my, your friends and family understand your decisions and don't think that you're choosing a different life away from them, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. That's a great point. And another thing you mentioned, and when you moved to Canada, after a couple of years, your friends couldn't stay in Canada. They had to leave because they couldn't stay longer in the country because of the immigration process. Because I think that's one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest downside of being an immigrant. And you meet people from all over the world. But at the same time, in this journey, you lose a lot of people because either you can't stay in the country, they can't stay in the country, or they move somewhere else, or you move somewhere else. So all these people, the great friends you meet all over the world, you're gonna somehow lose them.
Definitely. The first few years, it's a war of attrition, right? Because you make friends the summer, I guess, when you're outdoors more often, it's a lot easier to make friends. We always found that, people come and go all the time, right? Especially the newcomers, because newcomers find newcomers. That's the fun thing, because I always say is, if your locals have their own friend network and they always tend to come across as less friendly, where newcomers in any one place, right? You have that hostile environment where everyone wants to make friends, and you hear an accent and you say, well, there's a good chance that this person needs more friends, right? It was very difficult, I think, for people to stay, right? 12 years ago, if you're immigrating from Ireland, you could get a 1-year visa, but in that 1 year, you had to figure out how to become a permanent resident. And it was next to impossible unless your company were willing to go above and beyond for you. We're very lucky now, as in the International Experience Canada program for the majority of countries is 2 years. So that gives most applicants the chance to get here, to find professional work. And once they can gain 12 months of Canadian experience, it's relatively easy to apply for permanent residency, right?
Yeah, exactly. We covered the visa like a pretty details with Joanna, another girl from Ireland. And she managed to come to Vancouver actually with the same kind of visa, which is the same visa actually I used to move to Canada.
Excellent. And like that visas, and we're very, very lucky. Canada is one of the most open immigration systems in the world, I think behind New Zealand and Australia. But we're very lucky, right? As in 60,000 young people get the opportunity to come here and sample life. So, they always say that you should try at least a year living abroad in your life. So it's a great opportunity for people that Canada provides that benefit to up to 32 different countries, right? And it's reciprocated as well. That's the beauty of it. So a Canadian can also go to Ireland for 2 years to work and play as well.
When we met, you told me that you started moving to Canada, which is your business, your website that to help other people moving to Canada. You started it just because you saw all your friends, they couldn't stay in the country and they couldn't figure out a way to stay in the country. One of the reasons why you started this website to help other people to stay in the country so you don't have to lose more people, more friends, right?
Yeah, there were so many combinations behind it, right? Because here I was in Canada and everyone's talking about how they need so many immigrants to help the economy, right? We've an aging population here. And here I am reading about why they need immigrants, but then I'm seeing my immigrant friends drop off like flies. So it made me very curious, I guess, on the success factors, right? Why were some people very successful? And I mean success in terms of not in just staying, but in terms of long term as well, right? One of the great things about setting up my business was I kind of studied a lot of successful immigrants, whether they're from Ireland or various other countries in the world. But a lot of it really comes down to having good planning. So I was like, part of that is your personality, but part of it is access to information. So the key for me is, moving to Canada was born. The idea was, I realized there was too many gatekeepers in terms of immigration and employment information, right? You have immigration agents trying to sell consultancy services, or you have travel agencies trying to sell orientation packages. And I guess my idea was to make all that information freely available and come up with a different way to monetize it. So in 2011, I kind of set up a basic Facebook page. It was basic HTML data in the notes in the old Facebook just to test the market. And I realized there was a kind of thirst for information, right? In terms of, settlement, finding a job, how to execute on your visa. So we set up the initial Facebook page, and in 2012, I decided to quit my job in finance and focus on building out the website. It was a lot of new things at once. My revenue model was actually focused around recruitment. So I mentioned my brother earlier, but he's a civil engineer working in infrastructure. So when he followed me in 2010 to Canada, I realized that he had 3 or 4 job offers within 2 weeks. So that really alerted me that there was a very specific labor shortage in construction and engineering. So at the same time, the Irish economy, which had fallen apart in 2008 after the financial crisis, Ireland had to export a lot of our construction and engineering talent, just like my brothers. So I realized I want to try and help these people build a new life in Canada. So the idea was moving to Canada was to help all newcomers across the globe. And then I could monetize it by connecting construction and engineering talent with local Canadian companies.
Sounds like you're like an entrepreneur mentality, just like thinking about like, we got this problem, there's like so much demand for like these people, we should probably start something. Where this like a mentality is coming from? Because you were working in a corporate world.
Good question. I was always fascinated with entrepreneurship, right? I think, my parents were entrepreneurs. They were teachers, but they also ran a guest house, right? So that evoked a lot of my curiosity in travel and hospitality and different cultures. So I grew up sharing my living room with international tourists all summer long. So it was really kind of eye-opening to me. And I guess my parents were very industrious and hardworking. And as I studied business, entrepreneurship was always the one, right? Reading success stories and people creating new business models was always what kind of tweaked my interest. But the challenge I had was I felt I had skills and the desire, but the idea wasn't there, An entrepreneur you're just a set of skills without that critical idea. So my mentality was always just to try and gain experience in a few different areas. So I worked in financial services for 6 years. I was lucky. I learned quite a lot about software because it was a software company, but I found then I kind of transitioned to sales within that. So I was always focused on rounding my experience. And then, from probably 2010 onwards, when my brother had immigrated and I started looking at the construction skills shortage, I realized, well, this could be a short-term way to make revenue, where building a free information website really relied on building an audience, which was more of a long-term. So as an entrepreneur, I realized I can't just quit my job if I don't have a way to pay the bills. So essentially I had two ideas. I knew that I could monetize the traffic over time with advertising, but I really needed something in the short term. So it was a little bit complicated aiming two ideas at the same time, but it's worked well, right? I always say in terms of being diversified, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and I was very lucky that the businesses went through different cycles, right? When recruitment was going well, advertising wasn't necessarily, and they counteract each other, right?
Yeah, no, exactly, because you managed to quit your job after a year. You started this side project. Were you profitable after a year, or was it just like a big leap of faith?
It was a leap of faith. I had realized that I had tested a market, that I knew there was a need for information, right? I had, it started with a basic website for Vancouver to test the concept. And then I realized, wait a minute, I need to go a little bit broader, because I realized the recruitment opportunities are typically outside of Vancouver because everyone wants to live in Vancouver. So it was the companies in Alberta during the oil boom from 2010 to 2014. That was actually where a lot of the opportunities were. So I think the key for me was I realized I needed to make a change, but moonlighting wasn't the solution that I've really focused on. I think I saved up about $30,000, and I realized this will help me through 4 to 5 months of being really, really lean if I need to. And in the end, it just came down to betting on myself, because I knew that I couldn't really focus on a website if I had a 40 to 50 hour a week job in finance. So it was just a leap of faith, essentially. But when you have a following on Facebook and you kind of realize you've researched the opportunity, I just realized that I need to pull the trigger and just jump off that cliff.
Yeah. So like for your experience, like being people moving to Canada, what do you think is the biggest challenge for people to move into Canada or to stay in Canada?
It definitely comes down to planning, right? I talk about the success factors, and like part of it can be your personality. But if your personality isn't a planning mentality, you've got to force yourself, because one of the travesties I see in terms of working with immigrants here for 8 years now is people have they have a 2-year IEC visa. They come here saying, oh no, I'm just doing 2 years. I need to go back to my family. I've got, I have nieces and nephews at home. And then the travesty is it takes about 12 months to settle here. And then sometimes people realize after 16, 17 months that they want to stay, and it's too late. So I always tell people, prepare to stay, because having permanent residency just allows you to stay, whether it's a month longer or whether it's 3 or 4 years longer. But unfortunately, a lot of people have to leave because through lack of planning, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the idea is, always bear in mind that you'll want to stay if you enjoy it. And, Canada offers a fantastic lifestyle. So don't limit yourself in terms of time, and just plan, always expect that you might want to stay a little bit longer than you anticipate.
Yeah, because sometimes it takes a while to figure out if you want to stay in the country or not. But the things that you have to keep in mind, and the process to stay in the country is much longer than you probably anticipated.
Exactly. And it's getting easier in the last few years, and the immigration process is getting more streamlined. But in reality, you need to be pulling the trigger with permanent residency at least 6 months before the end of your work permit, right? So, and that's probably the most difficult part, seeing people who are really enjoying it here and they're devastated because they just didn't think they'd like it that much, right? And that's a bit of an oversight that can be improved with a little bit more planning.
No, just like an example. When I managed to get my first work permit in Canada after my IEC visa, the working holiday visa, they gave me the work visa for 2 years. And the reason why they gave me the work visa for 2 years is because it takes about 18 to 20 months to get your PR. So they give you enough time from the time you apply for your work permit and apply for the PR to actually get your PR. That's why they give you 2 years, just because it takes that long to get a PR, which is, for me, it's crazy.
Exactly. And that creates that buffer, right? And, even on that planning topic as well, is like the success factor is people that plan to get a great job when they arrive, is in a job that will challenge their career, always end up staying longer than the people who kind of haphazard move and they kind of say, well, I'll just come over to Vancouver or Toronto or Montreal. I don't really want to worry about getting a job. And the lack of planning on that part inevitably leads to panic because they run out of money quickly and then they end up taking an average job. When they've started an average job, they rule out finding their dream job. And then a year later, they've kind of haven't really moved forward in their career. They love Canada, but they can't switch jobs because they don't have permanent residency yet and stuff like that. So it really comes down to, planning for success here, as in, try to fulfill whatever aspirations you have in terms of 2 years is a long time to be in an average job. So plan to get a great job, do a lot of work in terms of Canadianizing your resume, as we call it here, and planning to stay longer than 2 years is the best advice I can give people.
Yeah, getting a good job is not just like for more money, but there's more chances to get a visa, because probably the listeners know that to get a work permit in pretty much in any country, the company need to prove to the government, to the immigration, that they're picking you, immigrant, over other people in the country, in this case, Canada, because there's not anybody else in Canada that can do your job. So if you're working as a waiter, it will be much harder to prove for the company to get you from abroad because they can't find any other Canadian. That could be very challenging. That's why a good job can help.
And I think it's just maximizing your skill set, right? I've seen it firsthand. A lot of times you can have a couple, and if one puts a lot of effort into maximizing their skill set and the other doesn't, the one who's unutilized often wants to return home, right? Because it's not ticking the boxes in terms of fulfillment, right? So, we've kind of lifestyle needs, we've employment needs. And I think the idea is you want to try and be your best person, even if it is for a 2-year period. So if you set yourself up for success with a lot of research and planning, it really helps you in the long term.
Yeah, you're totally right. Even though when I came to Canada, I didn't want to apply for the PR. I had to apply for the PR because that was one of the requirements to get a work permit, but I didn't want to. And I'm glad I did it, because now I have a PR. I can do whatever I want. I can work for any company I want. I can stay as long as I want. So it's kind of like a force me, but at the same time, I'm glad they actually forced me to do it.
Exactly. And even through the last 8 years, I've seen people decide to leave saying, hey, they don't want to come back, but because they have PR, your circumstances can change. People have often come back after 2 or 3 years, and you have the option to do that. People underestimate how easy it is to get permanent residency in Canada, provided you have young and educated, right? That's really the demographic they're looking for. Mm-hmm. But when you have permanent residency, it allows you can maintain that by spending 2 years in every 5. So you can theoretically come here for 2 years and then leave for 2 or 3 years and then come back, because your circumstances can change over the years, right? As in, even in Western world, we have boom and busts, right? So I've seen a lot of people actually leave and then come back because they have PR due to a change in circumstances.
Oh, maybe sometimes because you go back and you realize how good it was in Canada, and like, oh, you know what? I can probably go back to Canada because, I've missed that place, I've missed beyond the ocean, whatever. And that's why maybe you move back, because you needed to have some kind of proof that the choice you made the first time was actually a good one.
Of course.
And do you have any regrets about leaving Ireland?
Not really. I think it's tough being away from your friends and family. But I definitely don't regret, Canada as a destination, I don't regret, or Vancouver as a destination. It's tough because you always feel you can't be in 2 places at the one time, right? So part of the reason I set up my own business was, all I said, my lifestyle is great, but it's tough trying to fulfill living in 2 places at the same time when you've got 15 days of holidays in Canada, right? So part of setting up a business for me was to give myself the freedom of time and location to allow me to spend more time in Ireland. So I saw that as a means of solving the deficit I had in terms of the time I had with my friends and family. So I've been very lucky since 2012 is on average, I probably spend 4 or 5 weeks per year in Ireland, which is amazing because I still get to travel and do other vacations, but I get to sit at home with my parents and I get to spend time with my brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews and friends, which is a lot more time than people get to fit in. That's the tough part of being an immigrant. It's you can't live in two places at the same time. And even though your head and your heart can be at home, it's a very tough situation, I think, when you have limited holidays, right? And the trade-off is always, do I want to explore a shiny new place in the Pacific Northwest? Or do I want to go home for a friend's wedding? Or do I want to go home for Christmas with my family? So that was the trade-off that really inspired me to set up my own business and just have control over my own schedule.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. It's actually the reason why I started trying to build my online business for the same reason. Because after I came back from Italy, I realized how much I was missing my friends, and I wanted to spend more time to my friends in Italy, because even though I don't want to live in Italy, I still miss all my friends. And for me, the reason why I started this online business is just because I wanted to be able to work from anywhere I wanted.
Yeah, it feels like you're having the best of both worlds, right? Because I always say is even if it's having 2 or 3 extra weeks in Ireland per year, if I was doing a 9-to-5 office job, I always feel it's very fulfilling, right, to have that privilege.
But I guess you already had a PR when you started your own business, right?
Yes. So I actually had my permanent residency processed. I think it was within a year. So that's why I always say is I was very, very lucky. Like Canada just seemed to really work for me well, in terms of the lifestyle, in terms of things being set up. I felt my career, lifestyle, all of these things were all kind of dovetailing together. And I definitely had a very lucky experience, but that's why I'm kind of proud to help other immigrants, because there's so many moving parts in terms of what you're giving up and what you need to adapt to in a new place. And I kind of keep focusing on the planning element and anything you can do to help, because there is a formula for success, right? It's just being aware and actually having this information at your disposal. And you're not always ready to make some decisions as an immigrant. You say, hey, I've just booked my 2-year work permit. I don't want to think about permanent residency. But when you can get people into that mentality, that's what we try to do with moving to Canada. And it really helps people because it can have a huge impact on their lives. And they realize, well, I'm actually glad you asked me that question early.
One question about moving to Canada, because you said you are not monetizing on the content you're putting out there. Did you find that maybe people are they are not trusting your content because it's free? Sometimes you value some content more than others because by paying for the content, you kind of give a value. And when it's free, maybe it's hard to give a value to the content or trust the content. Did you ever find that problem or not?
Not really. I think it's an interesting perspective because I always say the challenge I had was when you're offering free information or even free consulting, as I do with my recruitment business, we never charge the candidate. So you're essentially offering free consulting on the bonus that you will be able to place that person with an employer. Going back to the content side I realized that there was a huge opportunity because everyone was trying to monetize the content in different ways. We realized that, look, this is a huge market and Canada has huge immigration plans. So I think the fact that it was free helped us get to that point where, we have 700,000 sessions per month now and 500,000 users on our website per month. So I think there's definitely a value in having free content. The beauty for us was that it was free, independent, and trustworthy, right? So it wasn't Ruairi telling you how to immigrate. Our actual content writers have all worked with immigration firms, right? So they have that professional experience. Our team live all across Canada. We're actually coast to coast at the moment right now. So I think a lot of it was very easy to build credibility because people will always read your content and they act in the content. And we always expect that people will verify any content we produce elsewhere. And I think when it passes that validation test, it really, really helps us because we grew very quickly through the content, right? We didn't have it was all bootstrapped. We didn't have we actually never paid for traffic until 2016. So we knew by 2016 we were onto something with just organic growth. And even right now, with 500,000 users per month, I think it's 70% of our actual traffic is organic.
And pay for traffic, you mean having like an advertisement on Google or something like that, right?
Exactly. So like search engine marketing and actually advertising and things like that. So a lot of it is either it's referrals, direct traffic, which is just people hearing about us, recommendations, and then organic growth traffic through Google is actually our main driver.
Okay. Now I wanted to clarify that it's not that you pay somebody to come visit your website.
No, not at all. Sorry. So.
And do you feel lucky to be an immigrant?
Definitely. I think it's great, to live. Like the immigrant experience can be very different in very different countries, right? Canada is extremely welcoming. I think it's very multicultural. It's diverse. The immigrant experience can be very, very different. I always kind of felt part of the reason that I wanted to immigrate was Ireland was very monocultural when I left in 2008. It was changing very quickly, but over the last 12 years, it's transformed completely. And I love seeing, we have Polish and Lithuanian people with Irish accents and seeing how metropolitan Dublin is becoming because we've tech people from all over the world. So I love kind of seeing those changes happen. But I think immigrant life in Canada is particularly rewarding because it's, multiculturalism is a part of our actual culture, right? People always ask me, what's Canadian culture? And I say, it's probably to be multicultural, right? Mm-hmm. When you look at the cross sections, even our politicians, you see people from all different ethnicities, and it's really celebrated and respected in Canada, which is a really good, it's a really good cultural experiment for the world because Canada is very lucky in that it's a new country. In my opinion, what creates racism is history. History creates a lot of racism because everyone's arguing we were here first, right? Where with Canada, Vancouver is only 130 years old. So the idea is everyone is somewhat new here, right? And people tend to just get along much, much better. And I think that's one of the benefits that Canada has as a country. And when you don't have that deep history, it's a lot easier for people to respect each other and respect each other's cultures and differences.
Yeah, but that comes down to the mentality of the whole country, because there's other country there. They're having, I don't know if you have the same kind of opinion, but for me, like Europe, for example, is having a new wave of racism that wasn't there before. It wasn't like in the United States that racism come from history, from the beginning of the country. It's actually, this is a new racism that comes from. And I think that's kind of racism, which is a topic that I'm going to talk to a future guest. We're going to go deep into racism, but I think that most of the time, racism comes from the government or how the government manages the people coming into the country. Because as I see it, it's like you are, for example, the child of your parents and your parents adopt another child and they treat the other child better than you. They treat you differently. It's not that you don't like the second child, the child they adopted, but you don't like that they treat you different. They treated the other child better than you. I think that's where comes racism. It comes from how your parents or your government treated you.
Definitely. And I think that whole we were here first mentality, or like I always say in Ireland, when the economy was booming, we were more than happy to have high immigration because there was lower jobs in society, in the economy, that people didn't want to do or they didn't have time to do or they felt were beneath them. But you'll see this over and over with economies. When things tighten up, everyone starts looking around and they realize here's somebody who's new or somebody who looks different to me. And now I'm competing with them, right? Mm-hmm. So that's where I think Canada is very lucky. It has this very deep history in immigration, right? As in, a lot of even the railroads here were actually built by Asian immigrants, right? And they didn't just come here for labor, they stayed. And, when you have those kind of fundamentals in place and you allow time and you celebrate multiculturalism instead of telling people that you have to be Canadian, this is what's Canadian. So going back to the question is, how do you define Canadian culture? It's like everyone is Canadian, right? Whether you're of Indian or Chinese or European descent, right? And then to that point is then you look across to politicians in Canada. It's amazing the inclusiveness, right? Where I think if you go back to Ireland, the same people that rise up in politics are the people who never went abroad. They never got to live other cultures. Where what's exciting now, I think, in Ireland is we're starting to see immigrant representation in politics, and it's stages of growth, I think, right? But when you have that representation at higher levels, right, we could have the same conversations about women in the workplace, but when women do rise up, they will rise other women up, right? And it creates a model for people that this is how things are meant to look, right? Mm-hmm. That this change is important.
Yeah, it's like an example, you said woman. The distinction between women and men can be the same way of racism. Because women have been through the same situation that immigrants are going through, that they couldn't vote at the beginning. They've never seen like a woman president, all of these kind of things. They just discrimination. That's pretty much racism is a sort of discrimination.
And history or fear of change is the barrier to that, right? And it'd be great if you just had a reset and you had, equal representation for women and immigrants, right? And kind of things. So that's where I always say is that it's kind of like resetting your own life as an immigrant. As in Canada had this benefit that they don't have that deep culture that Italy and Ireland have, where you have challenges with, hey, these people look differently or act differently and things like that, where Canada's huge benefit was that it was new to the game, right? So you have that benefit of a reset, almost like a fresh start.
We went quite deep in that conversation.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. I like it. And imagine if you have like a time machine and you could go back in time. Let's point if you could go back in time from the time that you left Ireland, what would you say to your younger self?
I would probably say do a winter in Whistler. That's probably it. As in, I felt bad that I came, I think I'm just trying to get the timelines right. Yeah, I think I came out of university at 22, right? So I had 4 years of experience, I guess, when I immigrated. But I think the best advice I would give young people is, go and travel, take a year off. I was always in Ireland, we have this mentality that, hey, you need to work and build a career, and that every 12 months you spend traveling is 12 months you could build security, right? So we're very risk averse in Ireland, and I studied the wrong subjects for the wrong reasons, right? I was very passionate. I was studying business and I was very passionate about marketing, but I was told by friends and family that don't follow a career in marketing, that accounting and finance is much better for job prospects. And I just felt like a bit of a sheep working in the financial services sector in Dublin. I felt like I made very safe decisions, right? Where I think you need to do what serves you. And I think having a year abroad, either before university or after university, should kind of almost become mandatory for people just to figure out where they belong in the world. And actually, you grow up very fast when you live away from home. So that would probably be my one regret, that I kind of felt that I fell into the kind of career thing. When I got offered a job, it didn't allow me that kind of, that 3 or 4 months to kind of just be a new immigrant somewhere or figure things out. That I kind of stayed working. I've been working full time since I came out of university, but I've been very lucky that I tend to be working from interesting places over the last few years, right? That I created that life for myself in 2012, where I said look, if I'm going to work, I want to be able to combine it with travel. And it was probably compensating for that regret that I hadn't taken a year off to travel and experience the world as a young adventurer. But then there's also so much merit experiencing the world as you're older as well and more mature, right? As in traveling as a young early 20s person and traveling as somebody in their 30s can be a very different experience. You're looking for different things, right?
Yeah, but even the way that you live, at least for me, if you live a year because you're going to be away for a year, you get like a working holiday visa somewhere in Australia or Canada, whatever, and you got this like a window of a year. I think for me, like, it's a different approach than somebody that lives for good. They're like, okay, I'm going to move. I'm going to leave my country, going to move to Canada. I'm going to figure out a way to stay in Canada. I think it's a completely different approach.
Yeah, and I think that's the really cool thing then about having the 2-year work permit, because you can actually create that buffer to kind of travel, right? And that's probably, as passionate as I am about traveling, I've never traveled for more than 2 months at any one time, right? So I would have loved to put a backpack on and travel a whole continent, right? Where I've been lucky enough to get to a lot of places, but there's a different mindset, I think, when you've spent a month or two away and you're kind of just completely decompressed from the working world, right?
Yeah. Maybe like the silly thing that if you are stayed there for a week or so, you don't even like try to learn maybe a new words, new sentences, just to say, I don't know, if you move to China or to, India for a week, you're not going to try to spend time to communicate with the people, with the locals. But if you're planning to stay there for longer, for 2 months, in that case, you want to just list, or maybe just automatically pick up some words. You just, like I say, out, thank you, please, get the basic word for the language. It's a different approach, completely.
Definitely.
And even more if you are planning to stay in the country, because in that case, you have to make it work.
Yeah, exactly. And like, that's why I always say, I still love traveling and I feel like you have a different mindset. But, going back to my older self, I probably would have said, hey, just take 6 months to go to South America or spend a season in Whistler, right? That would have been the advice that I would give to my younger self.
And for the listener that are thinking to move to Canada, do you have any other particular advice you want to give them?
Get on to moving to Canada. No, I think a lot of it is what we focus on doing is just trying to figure out what you want to do, because there's so many options now. As in, some people, their motive is, career improvement or lifestyle or things, or some people just want to change. But it's really handy, right? As in, the international experience. Canada, if you're one of the lucky 32 countries, it kind of gives you that window, right? Mm-hmm. If you're not one of those countries, there are other ways, right? I mentioned earlier, as in, Canada's immigration system, it's the third most open country in the world. There's over 75 different programs. So it can be very overwhelming for people. But what we do at Moving to Canada is we try to simplify. We try to add this layer of simplicity onto the Immigration Canada website, because immigration websites by nature tend to be very bureaucratic and non-user friendly. So we try to kind of create tools for people to kind of learn and try and figure out, as an immigration is typically a very technical executional thing, but why you want to immigrate or where you want to immigrate to is often a lot more important to the person than the actual processing of the work permit. And
there's any particular city you will recommend, or why people would move to either Vancouver or Toronto or Alberta?
There's so much. It really depends on your circumstance, right? As in, I would generally, if your motive is lifestyle, Vancouver is a great place to be at the expense of cost of living, right? It's a very expensive place to be. But it really depends, right? As in, what I find with immigrants is they'll always validate the choice of where they end up, right? As in, here I am talking about how amazing Vancouver is, but I never aspired to live in a huge city, right? If I aspired to live in London, I would have moved to Toronto, because Toronto, London, New York have a very similar vibe about them, right? Mm-hmm. I think what I love is just having the access to nature, is in having a dynamic city. But I always say is it's average compared to London or Toronto, but having access to nature on your doorstep was important to me. If you're a family immigrating to Canada, you're far better off looking at places, like Calgary or Ottawa, or even, the likes of Hamilton in the Toronto GTA. So they offer a lot more affordability in terms of family costs and kind of family lifestyle, right? But it really depends, I guess. I ask people, what's your career? If work is important to you, different locations have a different factor. The weather is a huge one, right? That's why it's easier for a lot of people to live in Vancouver, because everyone forgets that, BC Vancouver is actually kind of like the California of Canada, right? Because it's a very temperate climate here. We typically get 2 weeks maximum of snow per year. But we kind of have the 4 seasons. You have snow in the mountains where it matters and you can slide on it. But you get warm, dry summers. So the rest of Canada tends to get more harsher winters and warmer summers. Mm-hmm. But there's obviously exceptions. People forget Canada is the second biggest country in the world. So there's a huge variation in terms of climate between the Atlantic provinces, between the prairie provinces in the middle of Canada, and being in BC as well. So it's very hard to kind of give a one-size-fits-all recommendation for people. But invariably, as an international recruiter, I have those conversations a lot. But you can typically subscribe options to people, but then it's really up to them to kind of learn and figure out, well, what do I like? Because every location has pros and cons. But a lot of it is, information paralysis can be a factor as well. You got to figure out what appeals to you. Some of my colleagues are living in Montreal and in Nova Scotia, and they would always tell you that I wouldn't change this for the world, right? So it's always about making the most of where you are.
Awesome. And if people want to get in touch with you, want to know more about you, where people can find you?
They can contact me through my website, Moving to Canada. If they're construction and engineering recruitment, they can look at Outpost Recruitment. I don't mind people contacting me on LinkedIn as well. I just always say, look, give me a reason. I don't answer blank requests, but I'm pretty open. If people are curious about learning more about Canada or business side or have any random questions, I'm very happy to help them.
Awesome. And everything, as usual, all the links and everything we discussed will be in the show notes. Sweet. Thank you so much, Ruairi, to take the time to share your story and to share your knowledge.
Thanks for having me on your show, Daniel.
No worries. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. You can find the show notes with everything we discussed, links, topics, insights, and much more at emigrant'slife.com/episode 44. And if you're planning to move to Canada, I highly recommend visit Ruairi's website, Moving to Canada. You can find a lot of free information there. But if you still need some help, feel free to reach out to me at daniel@emigrantslife.com. We can schedule a call and I'll do my best to help you out. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you in the next one. Ciao!